Hi, this is Fiona, and this is a video following how I made this drawing of Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth is a character that has, I suppose, haunted me since I studied this well over 10 years ago at GCSE. Um, Generally, whenever I find myself inspired by medieval fashion or anything like that, I tend to end up drawing her some way or another. So I think she's just screaming in my head that she must be drawn over and over again. Uh, this illustration came about after I watched a documentary on the history of Dark Ages and medieval fashion, and I saw a hairstyle that I thought would kind of look awesome on her, and then it spiraled out of control. I always start with a thumbnail, which was just slightly earlier in the video, and then in this case, I then just expand it, and it goes all blurry and fuzzy, but it was a thumbnail. What does that matter? I then go along and, you know, actually make a slightly more detailed sketch, but I'm not one for crazy detailed sketches. I later then went and found some references for things that were appearing. I didn't have much of a clue what I was wanting to make when I started, so there were a few pauses that have been edited out where I was researching what kind of flower, styles of daggers, that kind of thing, all the fun research. Just putting a bit of a thistle design onto the dagger because it is Scotland after all. It's a fairly simple composition, really. It was just an illustration that I did for a bit of fun. So the real sort of, it's very front on. It's Lady Macbeth is that kind of character. Earlier on in the storyline, she is the one that pushes her husband into committing the murders anyway. So I've always quite enjoyed her as a character, that she has more story and development than he does. He's kind of boring, in my opinion. Some Shakespeare nerd out there is going to get very angry at me right now. Um, this is moving on to the bit that's actually quite fun, is the colour. It's no secret, you've probably seen it before in my work, that I start immediately with the colour. I don't bother with any line art or anything like that. If I do want lines on the work, I go back in later and draw them in on top of the flat colour. Um, in order to still see the sketch, I keep hiding bits of flat colour, so this is a lot of flashing bits and pieces going on. I've been a bit lazy here with the hands, knowing that at least one of them I need to find reference for, but I'll get there when I get there. So I just kind of threw a brown blob until that time should come when I have to take reference pictures of myself, which you will see slightly later in the process. Not much really to say about this other than sort of the colour supporting the composition. Obviously I want the very central bit to, from her face down through both of her hands, to be the sort of core of the composition. So like the red hair is then framing that shape. I don't want the dress to come across too bright. Her hands and the dagger and stuff need to remain more detailed, which will happen later. Everything from sort of her nose and her mouth and her chin should be fairly straight up and down the middle of the drawing. In this case, I could have like drawn things and then mirrored them, but then it looks too symmetrical, so it has to be slightly asymmetric, even though it's sort of carrying a symmetric feel. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what I'm doing there. Oh, saving it. I am terrible for not saving my work until later on, and then I remember I really ought to save it there and then. To add a little bit of depth, I threw in a couple of very subtle gradients. It's not something I normally do, but it can add just a little hint of depth into something. I wouldn't recommend shading with gradients, but it can sort of take away from the absolute brightness of her sort of red hair. For whatever reason, I decided her eyes should be gold. This has not happened in any of my previous designs, but she's a fairly fluid character. She tends to follow what I'm inspired by at the moment, so I wouldn't say this is a particularly accurate drawing or whatever. She's had bright red hair and dark skin in my head for quite a number of years. I have had people tell me, oh no, she can't be medieval if she's got dark skin. And you're like, no, she can be whatever I want her to be. This is a fantasy on medieval anyway. The hairstyle is something that might be seen more around 600-700 AD, and the dress is actually something from more like 1400. So if I can combine those, I can make her whatever skin color I like. It's not like people with dark skin didn't exist in medieval Europe anyway. It's not like they just randomly popped up later on in life. So yeah, this is back to the rose. The rose is blue because I was having a bit of fun with symbolism, and apparently a blue rose is sort of an impossible dream. So obviously the dream at this point is that she wants to be queen, she wants her husband to be king. It's not impossible because they get it, but it's obviously not something that they attain throughout the story. I looked up flowers for betrayal and, murder and things like that, and they were not quite as interesting. So I thought, oh, let's stick with a rose because they've got thorns, and that's kind of fun. There wasn't actually that much thought went into this drawing. Everything was sort of made up as I went along, so I wouldn't put this as one of my more in-depth illustrations, but I can certainly say it's been a lot of fun making it, and isn't that what matters the most? The colour scheme of the blue and the red and the gold is a style that I've used for Lady Macbeth for many years, so there was no question in my head as to how I was going to colour this. Oh yeah, here's my hand, and there's me without a head. Selfie mode on a camera or a camera phone is one of the best things that has ever been invented for artists. And yes, I'm holding my tablet pen in place of a rose. I'm always adding, like, a lot of the hands from my drawings are referenced from my own hands because it's much easier than having to go and find somebody else's reference. Some complicated poses and things like that, you often have to go do some research, but generally there's nothing that a selfie camera or a mirror can't do for me that I can't find on the internet with a little bit added imagination, because I can't draw my hands exactly as they are, because then every character would just have my quite bony hands, and that's not unique at all. Yes, the idea was then further here, as I'm adding, to have her finger pricked by the rose and have it dripping down the dagger. A bit melodramatic, but it's Macbeth. There's what's a little bit of melodrama when Shakespeare's involved. Well, that was me just checking the sketch to see that I hadn't forgotten any little details, and now is when I start to go crazy on the hair and other little details, now that I've built the core composition of the face, the hands and the dagger. I like to keep the drawing quite flat, so I'm just simply adding in the hair definition without actually shading it. This is what I mentioned about adding line art afterwards. If I'd drawn this beforehand, it would have struggled to fit the shapes that I wanted to make it fit, because I wanted it to frame the colours, and how much lines I put in a certain place makes it darker or lighter, and then that can contrast with the colours that I've chosen and things like that. So I just find it easier. But I do also come from a traditional painting background, where if you do want coloured line art on top of something, you have to do it literally on top of the paint. You can't draw it first and then paint on top of it unless you do it in black and work in watercolour. Yes, sort of, I drew it on a separate layer and then erased all the bits where I went over. But here I've selected the entire blue bit, and then I can draw directly within it. It's the downside of doing the gradient first. I probably shouldn't have rushed in, so that I could then add the gradient afterwards, but you live and you learn. I'm just sort of, again, building up the dress. These aren't particularly realistic folds. As I said, I wanted to keep the piece quite flat, very cut out looking. Even the shape of the dress has two very angular, down from the shoulders and then out shapes. This is something new that I was trying, so you might as well use something like Lady Macbeth that I've drawn quite a lot to experiment with. Oh, here I changed the shape of the shoulders of the design. I decided to go a little bit more traditional medieval than the big scooped open neckline. Again, because I work quite flat, this is fairly easy to fix. It would have been easier if I'd come up with the design first, but you know, things happen. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, but I'd seen someone the other day write on Tumblr that they struggle with their perfectionism, and I myself, this is something that I have struggled with, but I've learned that a drawing isn't over until I'm happy with it, but there is always something you can do to fix it. Even if it takes time, it's worth the extra hour or whatever if you have to fix something because you don't like it. It's worth restarting the minute that you notice that it's not going how you want it to. Like with the hands, if the hands don't look right, you take a reference picture and you fix them. If you still struggle to draw hands, you take time, you take a month or 2 months and you learn how to do them. There is nothing that can't be stopped or fixed. So yes, it might be a struggle immediately, but you have to think the long-term goal, not just this picture. There will be things that I look at in this picture later and decide, oh, I didn't do this as well as I could or whatever, and then I will make another drawing and another one. If I just let myself sit inside my own head and never make anything for fear that the hands won't look right or that the colours will be wrong or whatever, I would never make anything. The jewellery that I'm adding is, I think the Google tells me it is Dark Ages jewellery, but I changed the designs a little bit, but you know, it could be wrong, it's Google. But again, this is a sort of fantasy style design. In the end, I did actually get rid of the necklace. I decided it was crowding the area of the composition. I had declared it finished and I went to bed and I got up the next day and I looked at it and decided it was all wrong, so I got rid of it. That's why I tend not to publish any of my drawings immediately as I finished them, because sometimes it just takes that little bit of time to walk away and come back, which goes back to that perfectionism. As I said, there's always something that you can do, even if it takes time. Like I had to go back in and erase all around it because I'd already flattened the image. I work mostly flat. I don't use that many layers usually. As you saw, I changed the sleeves. They had gold trim and they've got black trim with gold accents. I changed the dagger handle to gold to match all the other designs that sort of came in later. Changed the dagger blade to slightly gold coloured from the steel, just because I didn't like it. I didn't think it fit anymore. Everything can be changed as you go along. Don't be afraid of admitting that you maybe screwed up or you picked the wrong choice, or you know, yeah, it might feel like a waste of time because you've done it before and you have to do it again, but the choice is having a drawing that you're unhappy with and putting extra time in and having a drawing that you love, that's the best of what you do. There are drawings that I've done in the past that have mistakes, but so long as I was happy with them at the time, there's nothing wrong with what I made. And yeah, here's the finished illustration. I'm pretty happy with it. As I said, maybe in a few days I'll discover that I don't like it anymore, but at the moment I am in love with this. It's simple but fun. And if you would like to see more work from me in the future, please hit subscribe.